over the past few weeks, the mainstream media narrative and also social media narrative for UK house prices seems to have changed from will there be a house price crash to there is going to be a house price crash, but how much are house prices going to go down? So that's what we're going to be taking a look at in this video. How much do I think house prices are going to go down over the next 18 months to 2 years? And the great thing is you guys can make your predictions in the comments as well. And then in 18 months to 2 years, I can make another video and see which one of us was the most accurate. Just before I get into the video, a massive thank you to everyone that watched last week's video where I talked about how mortgage increases were going to destroy the UK housing market. That video actually went slightly viral, which is the first time I've had that. And probably by the time you guys are watching this video, that video would have had about 100,000 views. So a massive thank you to everyone that watched that video and also that subscribed to the channel as well. But if you go onto Google or pretty much any media outlet at the moment and you pop in anything to do with house prices, you're going to see headlines such as this. House prices are falling around the world. Here's why Britain is next. A plunge in house prices is now inevitable. I'm kicking myself I didn't move faster. Fear and panic grips the housing market. House prices overvalued by a third and likely to fall. So like I say, the narrative has changed from will there be a crash to there is going to be a crash. Now, nothing is certain, and there's always a possibility that there won't be a crash, but the evidence is certainly suggesting that is what is in store at the moment. So before I can make my prediction, we need to actually look at a few pieces of data and I can tell you what I think is going to happen. So this is the official Land Registry House Price Index. They keep track of house prices all the way back to, I think, a long time ago. But in this video, I'm just going to go back to 2000 because I want to just focus really on the most recent crash, which was in 2008 and 2009 as a result of the global financial crisis. And I want to use that as an initial yardstick. Now, I'm not going to say that we're going to do exactly what happened there. I think it's going to be slightly different, but let's just take a look at that first, discuss why that happened, discuss the reaction of the Bank of England to that, and then what they may do to what is happening at the moment and how that potentially could impact prices for us over the next year or two. So in 2008, the prices started to come down. Let me go to September 2007 first, because if you watch my previous videos, you guys will know that I bought my very first house at the peak in 2007. I think I was paying 6.5% on my mortgage, and I bought a house in September 2007, and that was at the very peak. So I had to ride out a couple of years of negative equity. So I bought in September 2007, and that actually does appear to be the peak just before the crash. Yeah, it was there. So 190,000 was the average house price in the UK. And then at the very bottom of the market, around about 18 months later, we dropped down to £154,000. So if we take these figures over to a percentage calculator and we pop them in here, so it's 190,000 down to 154,000. That was a decrease of around 19%. Now, if you go onto Google and search for how big was the house price crash in 2008-9, you see various figures depending on what data source they use, but I'm using the official Land Registry figures, which are about as accurate as you can get. So it was just under 20%, which actually, when you think about it, isn't that bad when you consider how much of an increase there had been before that. But this could have been a lot worse if it wasn't for two actions that the Bank of England took. So the first thing was interest rates. As you guys know, these are going up at the moment, but back in 2007, they were running at 5.75%. Like I say, my mortgage was a bit above that, which is normally the case. You pay a bit more on your mortgage compared to the Bank of England base rate. So when the house price crash kind of started, it didn't actually kick off kind of till about 6 months later. But interest rates were about 6.5% generally for mortgages, and the Bank of England rate was just under 6%. But if we fast forward to March 2009, and the bottom of the market arrived a couple of months later, the Bank of England dropped rates to 0.5%. So one of the things to counteract the house price market from crashing was to reduce interest rates, and it did have an impact. So if you imagine how big this crash could have been if the Bank of England didn't take this action, as this is going to play into my analysis and prediction later on in the video. And it wasn't until over a decade later that at the start of 2022, the interest rates started to increase properly again. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, just something you may be hearing at the moment is people talking about interest rates will come back down very quickly. I remember in 2009 and 2010, there was lots of reports in the paper about interest rates going back up quickly as the Bank of England needed to go back to what they called normal rates. And that didn't happen. And they were repeating these headlines for years and years and years, and it didn't happen. So just because the media are going to be saying that interest rates could come back down quite quickly, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, as they certainly got it wrong for the past decade with regards to them going back up to what were so-called normal levels. But that's just something to keep in mind. So that was the first thing that the Bank of England did in 2008 to help with the house price crash and the economy. And they also started quantitative easing. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with what that is, but basically it is the Bank of England not printing money, but they're basically creating money. This is slightly different because they're not actually creating physical money, but they're creating money by buying up bonds, trying to inject money into the economy, which hopefully brings down the yield returns, which means people can lend at a cheaper rate, basically making money cheap for people to have. The problem is, if quantitative easing is done badly, it can contribute towards inflation. And I think in time we will see what's happened over the past decade with all of this money printing or money creation. It will become clear that that played a large part of what's happened with inflation over the past year. Now, I know obviously we have the Ukraine narrative that the war caused inflation, but we were talking about inflation a year ago, long before there were any talks of war in Ukraine. So inflation was always going to take place. It would have probably been at slightly different levels to what it was now. But what had happened over the past decade, I think, had laid the foundations for the inflation that we are seeing at the moment. So with those two things in mind, the Bank of England used interest rate reductions and quantitative easing to basically save the economy and the housing market. What happens when we enter a house price crash and the Bank of England cannot use those tools? This is what we're going to have to consider as we make our prediction. So going back to the interest rates, it's not as if the Bank of England are going to start suddenly cutting interest rates at the moment, because they need to put them up in response to what is happening to the economy. So the markets are basically pricing in that the Bank of England interest rates are going to get close to 6% next year, which is the complete opposite of what they did to kind of stave off the previous house price crash to prevent those numbers from getting too crazy. So when you combine the fact that they can't reduce interest rates like they did last time, and also they can't really do much more quantitative easing. I know they're technically doing some at the moment, buying up some of the bonds in response to what happened to the Chancellor's announcement, but it's certainly something they're not going to do on the scale that they did in the past, or it certainly doesn't seem that way at the moment. So if their biggest two tools have been taken away, are we going to see the sort of correction maybe that should have taken place back in 2008? Are we going to see that now? Potentially. And that's what I'm going to look at with my analysis. So how long is this going to take? Well, I think it's going to take, as I said at the start of the video, between 18 to 24 months to play out. And if we go to my Twitter feed, I posted an image about a week or so ago. This is the number of fixed rate mortgages that are expiring per quarter over the next year or two. And you can see we're currently in Q3 2022. And as we go into Q4, you can see we've got nearly 350,000 mortgages per quarter needing to be remortgaged. And over half of these mortgages, as you can see the yellow part here, these are from existing rates of under 2%. So you've got a large percentage of these people that will be remortgaging from mortgages of under 2% to mortgages that are realistically going to be above 6%, which you're going to see a huge increase. So this is going to slowly filter through to the house prices, and we're going to see them come down. So it's not going to be quick, but it is going to be, I think, quite large when it does happen eventually, and it all comes together over the next 18 months to 24 months. So if you're not following me on Twitter, make sure you follow me at Darren the Degen. That is where I post all of my latest thoughts about house prices and other economic stuff. So on to predictions. Let's go back to the land registry. How am I going to make my predictions using this and also the data that we've looked at in this video? So we know in 2008, house prices corrected just under 20%. And at the moment, we're at 292,000 is the average house price in the UK. So where do I think we're going to go? Well, my first logical place to target is where we were prior to COVID. So I'm sure anyone that's watching this video that was following house prices before COVID had seen the news articles about how the housing market was stagnating. It had been going sideways. And if we look at this, pretty much from what's around summer 2017, where the average house price was £225,000, all the way up to March 2020, £232,000. So the market went sideways for quite a long time. And there were lots of reports then about the housing market starting to slow down and potentially seeing a small dip. But obviously we had COVID and we had the lockdowns and we had lots of people thinking about how they wanted to live, which is what spurred on this sudden spike that we saw. So the last 2 years has given a lot of people the opportunity to make moves that they maybe didn't plan to make or had planned to make later on in life. And I'm one of those people that has made a move now that I didn't expect to make to a lot later on in life. But we've got to the point now where people aren't moving because they want to make changes to their life or improve their life. They're moving because they're not going to be able to afford their mortgage. So I think at the very least, the initial target is to come back down to these house prices. Now remember, for these couple of years here where house prices were going sideways, this is when interest rates were at 2% or below. So people buying and selling at this point were on very cheap mortgages. So all of these mortgages that are going to come to an end, and we've got 300,000 people per quarter at least remortgaging their properties, are going to be remortgaged onto 6%. So this is, I would say, the conservative target. So if we're going from 292 down to 230, let's go back to the percent calculator here. So we've got 292 down to 230. That's a 21% drop, which is just over what we saw at the last recession. But I think potentially we could go further than that. So if we went back to when interest rates were at what they're going to be, so if we go back to when interest rates were last at 6 and 6.5%, which is back at the previous peak here, when house prices were around 190,000. I'm not saying this is a likely outcome, but I think it's certainly a possibility. I think 20% is very, very likely. I think this one is maybe depending on how the government reacts, because I don't see the government just sitting by. I can see there being some sort of bailout or incentive to try and help things. But let's just run these calculations anyway. So if we went all the way from £290,000 average down to £190,000, we're looking at close to 35%. Now, I don't think we'll probably get to 35%, but I can certainly see us landing somewhere between the two. I think 25% is certainly possible, maybe as much as 30. So if I had to make a prediction now, I think 25 to 30% is certainly possible. I think there's a good chance that could happen with how things are shaping up. Now, obviously, I could be completely wrong with this. House prices could go sideways. The Bank of England might suddenly start reducing interest rates and house prices could continue to go up. You just can't say for certain, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. What are your predictions? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video useful, make sure you hit the like button. If you want to see more from me, subscribe to the channel. And what I'm going to do now is pop up the video that I was just talking about, where I explained how mortgage rates are going to crash the UK housing market, and I recommend you guys give that a watch.